This is day 6 of the September 87 7-day retreat. One can just go on listening to the rain. There's so much of it. The paths are getting soggy jelly. And have you noticed the moths are spreading, thriving on this? Mushrooms everywhere. And the grass is doing well. The pond is filling. Maybe by the time we get up there, we won't see any pipe. Looking at it every day, walking up there, it's like a daily pilgrimage to the pond. One wonders if the mud will ever settle out. It hasn't done so. It seems it hasn't even begun doing so. It always stirred up again. And from the very beginning that there was a little puddle. It was muddy and it didn't settle out. And one could get the feeling, couldn't one, it will never settle out. It'll just remain a murky pond. But we don't know. Interestingly enough, the water that comes down the new drainage ditch and into the culvert underneath the path, as it comes on the stones, it's quite clear. Maybe not when it is running heavily, but whenever I've been up there and was just a trickle, it was clear. This question comes up here and there in a meeting. As there is listening to the rain, to the heartbeat or the breathing, where is the questioning? The thought then comes up, says the person, I should be questioning something. Why does one think that? Does that thought come up because we talk about questioning a lot in talks, and so the assumption goes, we should be questioning. She says so. To beware, aware and beware of making anything that is being said here into a command. To come to a talk and we work together, we listen and look together in a talk or in a meeting. But when one sits by oneself, alone, then to find out what's going on. If there's listening and there's just what is, the sound of the rain and whatever else is going on, there may be no question whatsoever. The only question that may come up is, should I be questioning? And can one question that? Why? Does one feel one ought to be doing things? Is it because we've been trained from our earliest childhood to obey? Conform, comply. Look to authority to tell us what to do. In a similar way, people have mentioned to me that at times, or right now, they've gone back to counting the breathing or focusing on the breathing. One person mentioned, I'm sure it's going to make your hair stand on edge, but I'm doing mu right now. Questioning mu. There is, when we talk about this, when people tell me this, they usually anticipate a reaction on my part. That I will strongly object or criticize, not let a person come back to a retreat if they do that. This is an active live study in image making. It's up to each one what you do here, not dictating anything, but we're looking at things together. One doesn't have to come to a talk if one doesn't want to hear her expound whatever she's expounding. That's it, completely optional. But if somebody mentions counting and is open for me to ask a question, which is the case, is always the case. Nobody has said, I'm doing this and please don't ask me any questions about it. Then we wonder, what does it do? Does it work? Why is one going into that? And what people are finding is that if the mind is very agitated, brain constantly, as it does, spewing out words or images or memories, scanning for fantasy or so, then it's a very calming, brain calming thing to count the breathing, which is a fact. This is so. I remember reading about a woman who was classified as psychotic in a mental hospital. And an EEG was given to her. This is a recording of the brain waves, which were out of the normal range. And then she was given simple columns of numbers to add. And in doing that, the brain waves normalized. It was a calming effect in doing this adding of numbers. And when the task was finished or taken away from her, the brain waves returned to their abnormal pattern. So there is a physiological effect in doing anything repetitive in an atmosphere of stillness, counting or following, concentrating on a mantra. So many of the practices of what is called spiritual training are that. And the effect is so noticeable, the feedback is there. One feels better. Humming or syllables or chanting, all has a calming effect which can be measured. Proven. Sometimes people mention they do this counting or concentrating on the breathing, and when a certain calmness has set in, then maybe the counting drops off on its own. And there is possibility to attend. And when the agitation sets in, the counting seems to come back automatically. So what we're asking at this point is one using this to control disagreeable, upsetting, or painful thoughts and emotions, keeping them under control, under cover, through a practice, a concentration practice. Sometimes people say, no, even in experiencing the breathing, the mind seems to be open. The rain is heard, and it's not a focusing, a concentrating which is exclusive. And sometimes, upon looking at it, people will say, yes, indeed, it has become exclusive. And I am using this to hold disagreeable feelings and emotions at a distance or underground, whichever way one experiences it. Keeps them from coming up. Which does not allow any of this to be seen, to see the light of day, to air. But it's up to each one of us if we want to look at this human mind which contains every emotion, every sentiment, every pain and sorrow, every fear that has ever moved any human being. It's there in us. We usually feel very personal about our problems, but even though we may feel that way, they're not. Certain qualities are personal. But the fundamentals of fear, sorrow, anger, violence, longing for love and the lack of it, or the presence of it, the clinging, the rejecting. That's common to all human beings. And it is in oneself that one can meet this completely. One person mentioned that after listening to the talk yesterday, which so much was said about how we live in fantasy, how our desires are stimulated by fantasy and the pleasure of fantasy. This person said, when in putting aside fantasy, understanding about it, seeing it, putting it aside, she said, you know what was left? Despair. Despair, this person said, as though somebody would say to you, there's not going to be any more spring. Person said, I never realized that this is how we energize ourselves, by looking forward to something, by fantasizing about the future or the past. The addiction to that process can become very clear if one observes that. And if one abstains, then why is there despair? Which is a common reaction to that. It's nothing unique. Is it, in fact, similar to the withdrawal symptoms when one gives up an addicting substance? The whole organism still craves that, those fixes, those energy fixes, good feeling fixes. And when they don't come, there is this, what is called withdrawal state. If that is so, can one remain with that? Not attached to it, not make anything out of it, but just feel it. Move with it. Like people in fact do who begin abstaining from alcohol or drugs or nicotine. But in questioning it together, looking at it, there's more to it than just the withdrawal symptom. We must not posit that this is inevitable anyways. What happens is immediately a new thought. My God, what have I left? There's not going to be any spring. There's nothing to look forward to. How bleak. One immediately comments to oneself about the state one is in. Not just comments, one philosophizes about it. And this is input to the brain, nervous system and brain, and the brain responds. We've said that it's observable that one single thought evokes physical resonance, which we call feelings, emotions. It's so difficult to remain with something that has ended, and not immediately want to fill that with anything, with something. Commentary or new good feelings, new stimulation. So if this state of being called despair, if that comes up, can one eliminate the word? See that commentary is just that, philosophizing is just that. See the effects of it, and not get entangled in it. Entanglement in depressing thoughts means being shut off, isolated, and the pain of that. Not getting entangled in a thought even though it has occurred means that the mind can be open. To the feelings within and the rain and the wind outside. The droplets on the clover. We are so thoroughly conditioned to want to get something or get someplace. Or to resist something. Can these movements in themselves, the wanting to get someplace or resisting, can these movements in themselves come into awareness? We'll go on with a question mentioned yesterday. What is, or is there such a thing as right communication? Meaning really, how can we communicate with each other? Or how do we communicate with each other? Where do our words come from? How do we see the person we're talking to? If at all. Do we want to hear ourselves talk? Not often so much what we say, but that we're talking. And is there awareness of whether the person we're talking to is interested in what we're saying? Or is there such a tremendous urge to talk to somebody? And very little awareness of whether that person is at all interested or capable at the moment of listening. Why do we want to talk? What impels our words, our speech? Usually the way we're brought up, you come together and you have to talk. If you don't have anything to say, you feel embarrassed. One feels embarrassed. Maybe afraid of not being able to say something. And maybe envious of people who seem to have such facility of immediately talking with somebody nicely. So often we may be so heavy with some problem that we just want to find somebody to unload. Does it feel better than to look at the problem oneself? Is it easier to talk to somebody? And is that person interested? If that person is not interested, is one burdening someone else? Or in talking with each other, do we want to prove ourselves? People mention this very often in sitting in that solarium, coming in. It's the heart pounding and the excitement or anticipation. I've got to say something, and will I be able to say something, or what will she expect of me? She will probably want an interesting question. Will she like me if I bring an interesting question? Approve of me? Or not like me? Reject or think poorly of me? If I don't have anything interesting to say? Do we communicate with each other to sort of test out and re-establish our existence as somebody? Are we trying to be one up on the person we're talking to? Doing him or her one better? A sort of competitive game going on. Who knows more? Who knows it better? Is one already sheltering and protecting oneself for fear one may get hurt? People mention it very often, being really afraid of people, feeling so vulnerable and so afraid of being hurt, having been hurt innumerable times in the past, and now the fear of this repeating itself. And therefore often the incapableness of saying something. Do we feel that we're communicating well with each other when we find a common topic? Something we're both interested in. Skiing, mountain climbing, or politics. Or something we can both be afire with. But without that topic, would there be communication between us? Could there be? One can talk with each other, telling the other person stories about one's life, incidents, episodes, sort of to entertain the other person, or show what a rich or poor life one has had. And the other person being reminded of something in their life, so one exchanges information about episodes in one's life and feels one has a good conversation. One has a closeness, one is sharing what has happened in the past. Or one has a common past, meets after maybe years of not having been together, and then goes over, do you still remember so-and-so and what has happened to so-and-so? He is now such and such and has 2 children. And it goes on and on. The material seems to run out after a while. The well seems to run dry. One may really want to communicate about something, talk about something. But how can it take a start? Maybe the other person too would really want to communicate about something very deeply, share looking at something together, the way we're doing it here. And yet it seems so difficult to find an opening. Or does it? Is it? Is it that just all the other thing is in the way? Because I think the real sharing and communing with each other takes place when we're both looking at something together, at the same thing. Notwithstanding our different backgrounds and education or social standing. Looking at something together from scratch. Not starting from knowledge, from what I remember having said or understood before, but starting afresh This brings to mind one person's question. I also mentioned it yesterday. I would like to, I'm rewording it because it was a long conversation. I would like to help people. Actually, I would like to work with people who are dying. But I have so little awareness myself. Am I really fit to do that? I do see people who are dying, and I see such denial and such suffering. And there's a real wanting to work, to be with people like that, to do that as an occupation. But having so little awareness myself, so often in a mess myself, how can I do that? Am I fit to do that? When will we ever be fit to do something unless we do it? Start from scratch. And learn together as we're going. If there's a real deep feeling, that's what I would like to do, then why not do it? Not knowing how to meet someone who's dying, and therefore wide-eyed and open to observe what's going on in that person. Not coming with having studied at seminars and workshops about how to meet the dying, and coming with that knowledge and methods. I'm not putting down workshops and seminars on dying. But I wonder whether it's needed, if there is the real feeling for working with someone who's dying, being with that person, finding out together about what is going on in both of us. Who knows, the dying may be more alive than oneself. We recently received a tape from a friend whose brother had either jumped from a cliff or fallen off a cliff, and was discovered when he was about to die. The person who discovered him, he was on the edge of the cliff, looked down on the rocks and saw his friend. That person said the wave was a hand from his friend, from his dying friend. It was just something unforgettable, the expression. And when our friend who sent the tape about this, when he saw his dead brother in the hospital, he spoke about an expression in the face which was the relinquishing. The unburdenedness. His brother had been a very burdened person, deeply burdened, full of suffering, problems. And he said that face was unburdened. And in talking into the machine, there was this question, almost choked. It was choked with tears of the brother. Why did he have to die to find that? Did he have to die? To relinquish the burdens. Couldn't that have happened in life, in his life? So in communicating with each other or spending time with a dying person, can there be openness to where the words are coming from? The fears, the images, the clinging. And in looking at all that and seeing it, the relinquishing of it, just the bare communing. Not me as such and such, and you as so and so, me as healthy, you as sick. Do we know to be with each other? It's not knowledge, is it? It's something much, much deeper. Than knowledge about ourselves and the other and about topics to talk about, interesting episodes or common causes. Really being with another is not involved and enveloped in this constant self-concern. Being open to it, seeing it, opening the envelope. And discovering each other in one another. If we meet each other that way, from not knowing what to say, but the openness to oneself and each other, and something entirely new and unexpected may spring up. Like a fresh well bubbling up from the ground. You could say, well, What you had been talking about is two people who are into the same thing, both of them open to each other, open to themselves, open to finding out or exploring or just being together, maybe in silence if no words come. But what if one is not into that? One of the two. What about it? One is open and full of feeling of affection, love, and the other is not. We can't answer this here from any kind of theoretical point of view. As this happens or develops, then will one see? Is one going to leave that person as a hopeless case? I don't know what the answer is. I think this is the supreme challenge to all of us. How to be with each other. Finding out, first of all, how we are with each other. Without judgment, without models, role models. Without comparison creeping in left and right. We will end here for today.